Welcome to another edition of CEO and Market Expert Interviews. I'm your host, Lucian. Most of you know me from X as Triangle Investor. I'm glad to host today Mr. Greg Ferron. Greg is the President and Chief Executive Officer of PTX Metals. PTX Metals is a minerals exploration company with projects in Ontario. The company is involved in multiple metals such as copper, nickel, precious metals, and uranium, which Greg will explain a bit later. Greg, welcome to my show for the first time. It is great to have you.
Yeah, nice to be here and very nice meeting you, Lucian. And pleasure to meet you and your Triangle Investor audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Greg. Let's start with you, with your background, your origin story. So tell us, who is Greg Ferron, and the most important, how and when did you become PTX CEO?
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so I joined the board about 3 years ago, and PTX. It was called Platinex at the time. We changed the names recently just to better reflect the overall portfolio. And the founder of the company at the time, Jim Trussler, he had a long, successful career working in the industry at Teck and Falconbridge, and he had founded this company quite a long time ago. And he wanted to retire, and I had just left the role as CEO of Treasury Metals. So I went through a merger transaction, and this was an ideal opportunity. Jim wanted to step back. He's still on the board. He still helps a lot with technical advice. And since then, we've been very active the last few years in the down market, picking up what I think was a very nice portfolio of assets in Ontario exclusively, and enhancing sort of what Jim had built in Ontario in the Timmins camp. And now we're starting to see, the commodity markets change. We've moved from sort of acquiring and, cleaning things up and getting things permitted to being quite active with our exploration. We've added a lot of new board members, technical members, new shareholders, and we've raised a fair bit of capital as well. And just in terms of my background, I'm based in Toronto, Canada. I worked in the capital markets for about 10 years in trading, corporate finance, did a lot of work with listed companies in Canada, Australia, for example, around the world. I worked at the exchange for a number of years in their mining group. And then I started working in corporate development with a number of companies based in Toronto, helping get them financed, getting them listed, getting them restructured. And then more recently, I moved into more of the CEO exploration development role with a number of companies like Laramide Resources, Treasury Metals, for example, and now at PTX, and I've been on a number of boards as well.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a very good background, multiple commodities, multiple jurisdictions, as I see. Like I said in the introduction, your company is a multi-metal company, and I want to hear your commentary on the copper market as we speak. What do you think about the copper market, about the recent price action?
Okay, well, good question. When I was in the uranium sector, I followed a lot more about the demand and supply of that industry, and it was quite helpful. And in the down years, and as you know, there was a lot of above ground supply to get through. But now, you've seen the industry shift to a deficit, and you've seen the price respond. And I think the same thing's happening in the copper market. Obviously, it's a much bigger market. There's a lot of more of moving forces in the copper market. So I don't want to say that I'm the best person to predict the price or demand and supply. There's analysts and people like Robert Friedland that do a better job. But I am encouraged what I am and seen in the copper market. I think a lot of these commodities are the supply is getting tighter and the demand is there and will be there for a long time. It's going to continue, and my strategy is just to stick to what I know. I know Ontario, great jurisdiction. I see the Ontario government and the industry, supporting mining for the first time, and they understand it's a competitive world, it's a competitive industry. So I'm seeing a lot of improvements in working in Ontario. And I think if you have good quality assets in a good jurisdiction in this part of the supply curve, and we're building and growing our copper resource, I think the company is going to do very well.
Excellent. Just a quick thought on the nickel market as well, if you can share your thoughts.
Yeah, again, I take the same view. I think that there's I do believe that a lot of the industries in, say, Europe, but the US and parts of Asia, Canada, Australia are going to be looking for, nickel sulfides, and looking for cleaner metals that are more, nickel sulfides, the way they're produced, they're slightly environmentally friendly. And so I do think that trend is going to continue. I do think that a lot of the industries, a lot of investors, pension funds, automobile manufacturers, they are going to factor that into their decision of where they buy their nickel, their copper, for example. So I think, if you're in a good jurisdiction like we are, you've got good deposits and you can access capital and de-risk them, I think, you'll do very well. And I feel the same thing about the nickel market. I'm not going to try to guess here on this call the impact of the nickel laterites, for example, in Indonesia, the higher costs and how, they use coal and a lot of the acid technology they use to separate the metal, I know is not great for the environment. That could have an impact like we saw in the uranium sector for some time, but eventually, we've worked through that, and now there's a very strong demand supply picture for uranium, and that'll probably happen in nickel at some point. But I guess my point is that I do believe that certain industries and countries are going to want to be buying nickel sulfides in strong jurisdictions like Ontario and Canada.
Yeah, agreed on that, definitely, and good point. You mentioned jurisdiction, and you are operating in Ontario. Can you tell me more about doing business in Ontario? How is your experience from corporate level and technical exploration level of doing business in Ontario?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, for those who don't know too much about Ontario, there's a number of major mining districts. You've got the Timmins, Abitibi camp, half in Ontario, half in Quebec, and that's one of the world's largest gold regions. That's not Ontario is a very big province. So that's about 5-6 hours north of Toronto. So that area's got lots of infrastructure, lots of mining service providers, lots of operating mills. In the case of Shining Tree, our gold project, I think there's 5 operating mines and mills within 100 kilometers. And then another big camp in Ontario, of course, is the Copper-Nickel camp in Sudbury. That's world class. It's been mined for decades. One of the largest nickel copper camps in the world. And there's a real push to develop the northern part of Ontario now, north of Thunder Bay. And there's a lot of infrastructure in that part of Ontario. People don't realize that that's how they get the potash and the wheat, for example, out of Western Canada. And from that rail system, you can then get down to Timmins or Sudbury, you can get down to Thunder Bay and access the Atlantic Ocean. But north of that area, there's lots of mines, gold mines, copper mines, and the government is pushing to, and also there's a lot of First Nations up there. They want to have better access to Thunder Bay. So there is a real push to see that infrastructure put in place, put in roads. And if you really look at the existing infrastructure, there isn't that much to do really to open up the north. And I think that'll create maybe a third big camp in Ontario. You've got Red Lake up there, you've got Musselwhite, and then of course you've got the Ring of Fire, the Oxford Stall Dome that's got a lot of exploration potential. There's a number of mines now, but there's a lot of potential to find more copper, nickel, and there's a real push for the Ontario government to see that new area developed so they can, provide the automobile industry, the U.S. markets, the Western markets with copper, nickel.
Let's discuss your copper-nickel project. You have it's a W2. Can you give me an overview of this project, then we can move from there then?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're in the Oxford Stall Dome. The best known deposit is Eagle's Nest, which is owned by Wyloo, Andrew Forst, private equity fund out of Australia. It's quite a different deposit. It's deeper, it's higher grade. Ours appears to be more of an open pit and shallow underground. It looks to be like a much larger system. It's ultramafic. The copper's hosted in a gabbro, and then you've also got the ultramafic layers, very similar to South Africa. And we've drilled it down to about 300 meters, so quite shallow. There's a resource in one area of the project that Inco, one of Canada's largest mining companies, drilled off in the early 80s. and they developed about a 50 million ton deposit. And then a couple other operators expanded that along strike, and Aurora Platinum drilled much deeper, and they assayed for all the different commodities. So what we're trying to do now is we're putting together a resource from these three operators, and we'll announce the results to that in the next month, and then we're going to get out and start confirming that resource just to show the market that there's very good continuity over the 2-3 kilometer strike of that resource, and we're going to drill deeper to show it's open at depth and assay for multiple commodities. So that's our W2 project. As mentioned, it's in the north. We've got it permitted now. It's quite a large land position, about 250 square kilometers. Barrick owns the land immediately to the west of us. And as that infrastructure comes in, and as we find more resources through exploration, I think it's become a very valuable asset. And only about 5% of the project's been explored. In total, there's been about 113 drill holes, I believe, about 70 or 80 in that central resource area. And so there's a lot of value for us to unlock, and the market doesn't quite understand it because it was a recent acquisition. We put it together through 4 or 5 different acquisitions. The last thing we did was we bought that historical resource that the owner didn't want to sell, and then we got that done. Then we got it permitted. We got the First Nations support to get working on it, and now we're gonna announce the results of that resource, and we're drilling right now. We're finishing up an expansion program, so we'll get those results probably announced in about 30 days, and then we'd like to, upon completing that resource, go back and do that confirmation drilling of the resource area as well. So that'll probably take place more May, June timeframe.
Yeah, confirmation drilling. How many meters would that be? Do you have the plan?
Well, to convert all the historical resource, it probably would be a fairly large exercise to get that converted to the entire historical resource into a current compliant 43101, just because the work was done at different time frames. So I don't think we're going to look at converting the entire resource, but I want to go show the market that the historical work is of sufficient quality. The drilling is going to confirm the results from before. We'll drill deeper, and more importantly, we just want to show that there's very good continuity over those couple lengths, couple kilometers of strike length. So to answer your question, that second phase will probably be about 1,000 to 1,500 meters. So that won't be sufficient to convert the whole resource as mentioned, but then we want to look on making it bigger, or finding something higher grade, drilling some of the new targets, drilling that depth. That's where I think you'll really get a lot more upside for shareholders. One, let's just confirm what we've got. Let's get some comfort on that resource. But if we can make that resource 2 times larger, it'll be more interesting from a takeover perspective. Or if we can extend some of these layered intrusions deeper, or we can find some higher grade material, then those are, or even find an entire new mine along that. It's a large project, right? There's about 7.5 kilometers of strike length, and a lot of it's been untested. And if you look at the PowerPoint, you can see there's a number of VTEM targets to the north, to the south, to the east that have been untouched. So we need to get out this summer and just do some basic prospecting, walk the ground, do your typical early stage exploration to prepare those targets as well. And there's more IP work that needs to be done, more VTEM work that needs to be done.
After you finish the drilling and you bring this to NI 43-101 category, what are the next steps after that?
Well, the other thing we like to do is some metallurgy work as well. So this financing we just actually announced, we're looking to finance the resource modeling, some metallurgy work, and then this confirmation drilling. And then we'll be able to publish, an estimate of the tons and grades of that resource. So I think that'll help stock. It can also start attracting institutional investors when you come up with a resource. Yeah. So and then the plan would be to focus on, as mentioned, just trying to grow the size of the deposit and look for new discoveries. And eventually, I think as the infrastructure comes in and as this area gets developed, we'd like to get this project in the hands of somebody larger.
Got it.
These copper nickel projects tend to need a lot of capital to fully de-risk.
Yeah. Just a quick return. You said that you are doing financing as we speak. It's a flow through, right? And all the proceeds are going to this project.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're just filing our financial statements right now for the year end December. I think about 2.5 million of capital. Some of that's gone to fund that first phase I talked about, that expansion drilling.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to top up the treasury here to get some additional funding to get sort of what I see as very, crucial work is getting this resource better understood and getting a better handle on the size and getting that out to the market.
Got it. Let's move to Shining Tree. Tell me more about this project. First of all, give me some overview.
Yeah. Okay, sure. So this is quite different. It's a typical greenstone belt in the Abitibi. There's numerous operating mines. You've got Alamos's Young-Davidson to the east, and we're on another fault called the Ridout Deformation Zone. And there's a number of major faults, as you're probably aware, that run through the Abitibi. On our fault, you've got like the Borden mine owned by Newmont, and then you've got the newest mine in Canada called Côté Gold, owned by IAMGOLD. So what we've done there is we've got a very large land position, about 350 kilometers of greenstone belt on two projects, Heen and Mallard, located north of the Côté deposit, which is previously owned by Noranda. And then we've got the Shining Tree project, which has got a small resource. There's a number of small scale past producing operating mines in the project, and that we acquired the operating mine from Alamos Gold. And we've been, doing systematic exploration over the last few years. So looking outside that central area where there is the past production and the resource, looking for, for new mines, doing all the typical mag and IP and thousands of geochem samples and golden till and trenching. And now because we bought that operating mine from Alamos, we've been stripping that historical mine to see, because we always owned the underground, we just didn't have the surface. And there was a small underground producing mine, so we know there's some resources down there. So we're just trying to connect the open pit with the underground, and then we'll begin drilling that. And at our Heenan project, we made a nice discovery just at the end of last year, fairly low grade, but we drilled 78 meters at about 0.5 gram. We just did 3 50-meter spacing holes, and all of them hit similar, well disseminated gold over 100+ meters right at surface. So we're encouraged with that. So we just want to understand the geology a little more before we get back and begin drilling that again. And then we also have probably the best drill target is the Mallard project, which again is north of Côté, and it was a Noranda discovery. They walked away from that in the 80s with a low gold price, so we'd like to get out and drill that this summer as well. And we do have a partner that's funding a lot of that work called Fancamp. They own 25% of the combined portfolio of the 3 projects, and we own 75%. And by them spending an additional $1.5 million, it'll then be 50-50. And ultimately, what could happen with something like that is we could spin that out into a separate vehicle. We think it needs more time to grow the resources and make more discoveries and de-risk these projects further. But it's set up that it could be a separately traded company. That way, when you're buying shares of PTX, you're buying for the copper project, and then South Timmins would be, a vehicle for the gold assets. But I think it needs a bit more time, and we could look at consolidating the camp further, and it could be a vehicle that some of the operating mines are obviously would be interested in the future.
Yeah, I understand the plan, but before that, what exploration work will be carried over there?
Well, this year, we're gonna announce our program in a couple weeks. We'll get started in May, and then we've got the whole season ahead of us. Most of that work is just going to be exploration work, getting ready for additional drilling, and then throughout the year, we'll for Heenan, for example, we would do additional drilling from surface to learn more about that discovery, to see if it can get much larger, or if the grade improves, with different angles. Maybe perhaps you drill some of those holes at a different angle. to drill into the zone differently. And at Mallard as well, we'd like to get and drill that small at surface resource further. And then Shining Tree needs a fair bit more work to drill from surface to that underground mine to see if we can start building a resource at the Ronda mine. There's a number of like small scale resources, 100,000 ounces, 200,000 ounces, all sort of within that central area. So we still haven't quite figured out, if there's a major deposit or if all these little resources link up. But as mentioned, there's about 20 or so different small scale operating mines in that central area. And at the same time, we're looking along that Ridout trying to find a larger deposit.
Yeah. Okay.
Lots of work to be done there.
Definitely. Let's move to your royalty portfolio. You are developing a net smelter return royalty portfolio. Can you tell me more about some more details about it, please?
Sure. Yeah. Correct. We do have a small royalty portfolio. I wouldn't say it's the core focus of the business right now. We've been, busy acquiring the projects and de-risking them through exploration. But through that, we've picked up about a 5 to 6 royalty portfolio. And the idea there is eventually we're look to, to probably divest that, and, we could monetize some royalties on our projects as well. Just to bring in some additional funding.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's kind of the focus right now, but they're all Ontario. The most interesting one is a platinum palladium project in northern Ontario, up near the Ring of Fire, called Big Trout Lake, and then there's a couple in Thunder Bay as well, and there's a couple in Shining Tree.
Let's talk the uranium part of the business. You are a part of the company called Green Canada Company. Can you explain how this company was formed and share us some overview as well?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So over the last few years, as mentioned, we put together quite a nice portfolio in Ontario, in the down market, thinking that eventually if we can de-risk the portfolio, we could start spinning some of this out. So we did buy a number of uranium projects from a company called IZZ in Quebec. And then we've sort of spun that out. We created a subsidiary of PTX called Green Canada. So we currently own 51% of the equity. Within that, it's got a very nice portfolio of uranium projects. We just acquired some interesting ground in Nunavut in the Thelon Basin. So that'll be the flagship asset. And that's where we'll focus our exploration. But also in that portfolio, you've got some uranium projects in Athabasca, Quebec, and Ontario. And the idea will be, we raised about $500,000. We've added about 50 shareholders, all sort of smart, knowledgeable mining and metal investors in Europe and Canada. And eventually we'll look to list that. We're just waiting to make one more sort of more mature acquisition that'll help give it a bit more traction in the market, give it a bigger market cap, and then we'll begin listing that subsidiary. So it'll just be typical IPO in Canada, and then Platinum or PTX will be left with a fairly large position, which we can either dividend to our shareholders or hold that investment on our balance sheet. So that's something you can see should take place probably about the third quarter by the time we begin trading.
You mentioned the Nunavut project. In a perfect world, when will you start exploring this project?
Well, yeah, I mean, like many parts of Canada, I mean, April, May is probably the earliest when the snow melts. So a lot of that, the work that needs to be done at this point for this particular project, and like I mentioned at W2, some of the only 5% of that property has been drilled. So a lot of it you need to get out and just do typical, exploration work. So walking the property, sampling, mapping, IP, trenching, that kind of work all happens as you're aware in the spring, summer, fall season. So so the season is coming up for Nunavut, and of course, lots of other parts of Canada you can drill in the winter. There's often a benefit of drilling in the winter, but that field work has to happen in May, June. So that's when we'll begin, getting the work done on that property.
You said that you are a owner of 51% of Green Canada. Who are the other players in this company? Who are the other owners?
Yeah, so 51% is owned by PTX, the company, and yeah, the idea is we'll dividend that to our shareholders on sort of a pro rata basis. The other 50 shareholders, you've got 3 or 4 corporates, Laramide, IZZ, a company in Quebec. I think who else is that? Red Cloud, a couple of funds in Toronto, and then a number of high net individuals in Switzerland, France, and Quebec, Toronto. So yeah, a fairly good mix of shareholders. And then we'll look to, we could just list. I mean, the one thing I think a lot of companies don't do well is they list these private companies with very little distribution. They put it into a CPC and they don't trade. So that's kind of the thinking that when we close this final acquisition we're working on, we could dividend these shares to our shareholders through our IPO. We've got over 1,000 shareholders, about 2,000 shareholders in PTX. So it'll give you a fair bit of distribution for trading. And then, of course, with an IPO in the uranium sector, you could probably add on another couple hundred investors through a financing.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds like a good plan, definitely. Greg, what is some longer term plan for your company? Is it to continue be the diversified company, or you will try to be focused on a, let's say, single commodity?
Yeah, I think longer term, yeah, I mean, the strategy is not to keep acquiring assets. We're done that phase. We know we've got them permitted now and financed, and we've been, fairly aggressively doing exploration the last few years. So I do see us ultimately completing that spin out of Green Canada first, and then eventually the South Timmins division. I think there's a partner and us are aligned that at some point it makes sense to spin that out to a separate company, maybe do because as a subsidiary of a company like PTX, you can't issue shares of the joint venture very easily, or no one would want them because they're not tradable. So that would be the advantage of going public. So I see that happening as well, perhaps this year, next year. And then we'd like to uplist PTX on the TSX Venture as well, and just to get better access globally. And then, yeah, the focus would be at that point just on developing the copper nickel project, which I think could eventually, if the resource gets large enough, could be a target for a takeover as that region gets developed, and more resources and more investors and more capital is put into that camp.
Okay, so my next question was uplisting to TSX, and you already answered the part of it. My question is, are you already have initiated some activities with regards to that?
Yeah, yes, yeah. So we're working on that now, and it isn't that difficult of a process because we're already public for a number of years in Canada, and yeah, and then that does, they have a global footprint, so you've got more access online, in Europe in particular, the US as well. So that is something I hope you can complete sort of in this quarter.
You said that you are done with M&A. Did I get it right? You are not searching or looking for any other projects at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, I don't think we need to, like W2, we've, consolidated the project for the first time, actually, including the resource into one company. So the only M&A may be would be to divest or bring in a partner or something like that. The only thing Green Canada is looking at making one more additional acquisition, but no, I don't see doing any more M&A unless, for example, if that would be the advantage of having South Timmins as a separately publicly traded company. That company could buy some of the properties in that region because there is more consolidation to do, but I don't see that happening within PTX.
Okay. Can you tell me more about the people behind the company? Who is on your board?
Sure. Yeah, on our board we've got I guess two geologists, the founder and Felix Lee, both have a lot of experience in the Canadian markets and quite well known. And then we've got the rest are finance individuals. Our chairman is based in Paris. He's a nominee of Treasury Metals, one of our shareholders, and we've got quite a large European shareholder base. So he's close with a lot of those shareholders, and he's a business person. He's involved in the mining sector and investments. We just put on the board John David Moore, a large shareholder from Quebec, who's quite experienced in the junior markets. And then the Sam Curie, he's the head of the audit committee, and he's quite experienced. He's an engineer, CFA, CA, and quite an experienced in the capital markets as well, financing companies and listing companies. So yeah, we've got a good board, lots of experience. And then on the management team, it's quite small. Myself and the CFO are full time. We've got an operations person, and then one thing I've done is we've put on a very good exploration team focused, dedicated to one for Shining Tree and one for the Copper-Nickel project. And then we support that team with some very experienced advisors as well.
Excellent. You mentioned Europeans in share structure. How is your share structure looking, your share registry at the moment?
Sure.
If you can give us some breakdown.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we have about 330 million shares issued right now. It trades fairly well. We trade about 100 million shares a year. About 20% of those shares are held by mining companies, Alamos, Fancamp, to name a few. About 20% would be in Europe, high net family offices, retail, a few institutions as well. And then myself and, the board and, family, associates that we know. The founder had quite a good following. I would say was another 20% of the shareholder base. And there's a fairly good chunk of shares in Quebec, Alberta as well. And yeah, so where we don't have a lot of shareholders is the US and BC. So we're looking to increase our marketing now that the markets are improving, and look to see if we can expand that shareholder base. And that's part of the reason why I think it's important we get on the venture exchange.
Yeah, definitely venture exchange will help. And I had a lot of experience and talking with CEOs that confirmed that venture exchange really propelled the volumes of trading, definitely. Okay, you mentioned briefly skin in the game. You have probably skin in the game and your team, but can you mention some numbers here?
Yeah, sure. So I own 7 million shares. I bought all of them in the market or through financings. And yeah, the founder and board member, Jim, his family have probably 20 million shares in total. The chairman, the company he's the nominee of has about 16, 17 million. Fancamp has about 25 million, and they have a nominee on the board. Yeah, so we've got a lot of John David, I guess he's got maybe 10 to 15 million shares as well. So a lot of the directors are large shareholders.
Okay. What is your current cash position as we speak?
Yeah, so our financials are coming out in a few days, and I think it's about 2.5 million. And we're looking to raise another million or so right now. And then we funded that first phase of drilling, so that was about $1 million. So yeah, we're still sitting around 2.5 million upon closing this financing. Yeah.
Would you say that that will keep you covered for 2024?
I think
Or majority of 2024?
Yeah. I mean, for the gold portfolio, if that partner continues funding that work, then we won't have to finance that. And when we get this resource out on the Copper-Nickel project, I think that's a big step forward for us. So yeah, so we don't, then all the projects have very strong assessment credits, meaning, there's a reserve of spending that we don't need to do. So we won't need to finance again, but as the market improves, we could look to do an institutional round, because we're predominantly owned now by high net and retail and mining companies. Or, ideally, we'd like to try to bring on a 9.9 type investor that's interested in our copper project. So that would be another way to raise money.
Yeah, good point. Greg, can you tell me my final question, actually,
Sure.
future news flow from the company? What and when can investors expect news from the company?
Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, so I don't have the exact order, but our expansion drilling is just wrapping up at the copper project. So we'll have those assays. We'd like to announce that exploration target I talked about under 43-101, just to give an idea of the range of the resource size from all that historical work. That'll also be kind of a May, June time period. And then we go out and do that confirmation drilling. And then there'll be, we have to get an update out on Green Canada on the Nunavut ground and our listing, and as well, I'm just waiting for this other transaction to be completed. And then in May, I think it's early May, first or second week of May, we're going to begin doing the exploration at the South Timmins properties. So that work is going to cover all three properties, Heenan Mallard and Shining Tree. So that's obviously going to get going in May. So we'll have an announcement about that and the details of the program. So quite a busy schedule ahead.
Definitely, and some exciting stuff coming, especially when we see the market cap currently is around $11 million. So re-rating could be around the corner, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think we'll have a good year as we get into the second, third, fourth quarter, with all this news getting done and money, how it works. Money is now just moving into the large producers. They're very cheap as well, and so people probably see some immediate upside, and then money will move to some of the larger market cap developers, perhaps, because they were very unloved. But you've got the strong equity markets, you've got the stronger commodity prices right now, and I think these small micro caps will get trading better, and valuations will improve throughout the year.
Yeah, agreed, Greg. That was Greg Ferron, Chief Executive Officer for PTX Metals. Greg, I wish you luck with your projects, and let's catch up sometime soon again. Thank you very much.
Okay, sounds good. Nice meeting you, Lucian.